Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome back to today's Daf Hayomi, Maseches Horayos, Daf Beis Amud Aleph. Right at the top of the Mishnah, we begin a brand. Masechta Horayos means a kaira'ah, a ruling, a verdict issued by the Bezdin. Here we speak about the Grand Superior Court, the Bezdin Shel Shivim Ve'echa, 71 Dayanim sitting in the Beis Hamikdash. So this Masechta primarily deals with a case where the Bezdin erred, made a mistake in their ruling regarding a very serious issue. They spoke about permitting certain types of chelev. Fat is really usur to the highest extent. If one eats fat, b'mezid, the penalty is death, is kares. B'shegeg would be a korban chatas. Or with respect to a detail, a malacha that they permitted in Hilchos Shabbos or Hilchos Nida. So very severe, very weighty issues that they erred about, and they issued that ruling in error. And the tzibur, the kahal, the crowd, the community, the nation in Eretz Yisrael followed through. They implemented this ruling erroneously. And then it turns out the Bezdin discovers their mistake. Now, who's responsible? So firstly, it's a brand new type of korban. It's called par. A par he'elim davar shel tzibur. He'elim means it was hidden, it was concealed. So they bring a par, a cow. Most shittas hold that the Bezdin brings the cow to cover for this avera, even if they personally did not commit this offense, but since they brought about, they caused through their ruling that the community sinned, they bear responsibility for this offense, and they must bring a korban par he'elim davar shel tzibur. Now, typically, when a person does this type of avera b'shegeg, he brings a personal korban chatas, kizba, seira, female sheep or goat. But in this case, where it was done, facilitated by the Bezdin, the korban switches. It's no longer a private offense. It's no longer a personal avera. The Bezdin is culpable, and the korban now switches to a par he'elim davar shel tzibur. So let's see the Mishnah. Hayru Bezdin. So the Bezdin, the Grand Court in Beis Hamikdash, have issued a psak halacha. Lavar al achas mikol mitzvos hamuras b'Torah, to override a mitzvah, an isser specifically, an isser said in the Torah. Now Rashi says, Kigoin, for instance, Rashi on top line, Shahiru, they rule shechelev oidam mutar, blood is permissible, fats, the forbidden fats are permissible. And this was due to their misinterpretation of the passage in the Torah, the halachis, Hershebal Peh, interpretation of the psukim. In any case, that's what they paskened. V'holach hayochid, says the Mishnah, an individual, not most of the tzibur, one person alone, or yachid here refers to anything up until the majority of our nation, went along, v'asar shegeg, committed this sin unknowingly, right? Unintentionally, not realizing that it's a problem up here based on the ruling issued by the Bezdin. So he sinned. Whether they also sinned or just him, it doesn't really change the equation. They bear responsibility for his actions. So we have three cases: bein she'asu, whether the Bezdin themselves actually implemented their decision and actually carried out their ruling, and he went along, did it with them at the same time. Or second case is bein she'asu, they actually practiced their ruling, and he followed at a later date. So both did it at different times. Third case, bein shelayasu v'asa. So he was asa, but they didn't actually do it. In all three cases, Pater, he is totally exonerated because he was relying on the Bezdin. It's not his fault. However, part B of the Mishnah discusses Hayru Bezdin. So Bezdin issued that ruling. But in this case, V'yoda echad men shato, one of the members of the Bezdin, one of the Dayanim, realized their mistake. Oy talmud, or even if he wasn't, a high-ranking member, he was just a student sitting in the courtroom, part of the configuration, but wasn't formally a dayam. He was part of the Bezdin, setup, but he wasn't really a full member. But in fact, he's qualified to rule. He wasn't actually a dayan, but he's on that level. And he was aware of their mistake. He disregarded his own better judgment, and he followed their instruction. He ate the chaylev, he ate the dam, knowing deep inside that the ruling was issued in error. In this case, he bears responsibility. He is culpable. He should not have relied on the bezdin when he knew they were wrong. So again, all three cases, ben she'asu v'asu, whether he did with them, ben she'asu v'asachrein, or he followed them, ben she'lo yasu v'asu, or they didn't even do anything, just he did. In all three cases, he must bring a regular carbon chatas. Why? Because he didn't really rely on the bezdin. Zakla. Bottom line, this is the rule to work with. If one committed that sin relying on his own judgment, he's chayev, such as in the second part of the Mishnah. But if one relied on the bezdin, then of course he's pater as per part A of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah begins with the words Hayru bezdin. They issued a ruling. Now, do they actually tell you to do it, or simply, well, we think it's okay? Amar Shmuel, Lo'olam ein bezdin chayavim. The only way bezdin is responsible for their ruling, which was implemented erroneously, mutarn atem. They must add the word mutarn atem. It's permitted for you to do. So if they just say, well, it's okay, that's more, in theory, an academic expression. But once they say mutarn atem, you're allowed to. It's mutar for you. That's called hayru bezdin. It's a psak that is meant for implementation, for practical application, and they bear responsibility for anything done as a result. Rav Dimnar Do Amar, he adds another word that must be there. Ashayemru. It's only until they say lahem to the crowd, mutar atem la'asois. You're permitted to do. Because anything less than that, my time, why is that needed? Anything less than that is not a conclusion of the ruling. The only way you know for sure you can do it is if they expressed it with confidence, with clarity. Go ahead and do it. I'm going to bring a proof to Rav Dimi that you must actually have that full expression la'asois. We have a Mishnah dealing with a different topic, slightly different topic. You have a local Rav, a dayan, a judge, who took issue, who challenged the bezdin hagadol. So he issued a ruling to permit something, let's say, right? And he went up to the bezdin to deal with it, and they overrode him. He went back to his town. He came back to his city. He kept on teaching, learning and promoting the way he did before. In disagreement of the grand court, the authority of the grand court. Pater. He's not considered a zokein mamre, a rebellious elder, because all he did was learn and teach. But hayr la'asois, if he actually ruled to do, that's different. Now, since he did it against the bezdin, chayiv, he's considered a zokein mamre, he's a rebellious elder. Apparently, just learning and teaching is not sufficient to be considered a psak, unless you say, go ahead and do it. Likewise, in our case, bezdin is only going to be a responsibility for an erroneous judgment on their part if they actually were matir la'asois. Amar Abba. I have another proof to this point. We have the same in a Mishnah. So the woman whose husband disappeared, one witness showed up and testified that he passed away, and the bezdin accepted it, relying on her due diligence. So they ruled, go get married, you're free to marry another man. Or instead of going and getting married, she took advantage and she spent time with another man in a non-marriage setup. She sinned with another man. Then Mr. Husband shows up. Turns out that she was a married woman all along. So now if she would have gotten married due to the psak of bezdin, she's pater from a carbon because bezdin gave her the green light. But in this case, well, she didn't marry as per the bezdin's ruling. She went and hung out with somebody. So now who bears responsibility? She does. Chayevas bekarban. She has to bring a carbon for that experience. Because the bezdin only gave her a green light to get married. But bottom line is, the point that we're trying to pick out is, Look at the wording of the Mishnah. In describing the ruling of the Bezdin, it doesn't just say they said she's mutter. You can go get married. They actually told her practically what to do, what she could do. So that's called Hayra Lamaisa. And that's right to Rav Dimi. A true verdict, a true psak, a true ruling is only when you say mutar natan la'asois. Amar Ravina, we find the same in our Mishnah. Take a look at our Mishnah, which teaches us the very same point. Because look at the opening words of our Mishnah. Hayra bezn li'nosei. Sorry, Hayra bezn la'avoir. Rather than simply say bezn were matir or something, it spells it out. Hayru bezdin la'avoir. Bezdin ruled to go and do, eat the chelav, eat the dam, lavar alachas mikol mitzvahs hamoros b'Torah. That proves that bezdin is only going to be a responsibility if they actually spelled it out. Go ahead and eat it. Go ahead and do it. Apparently, anything less doesn't really cut it. So there's nothing more to add. It's pretty much proven from all sides. Okay, so according to this version, Shmuel teaches that the Hayra is only when they say mutarim atem. Rav Dimi adds mutarim atem lasois, and we have it proved from various sources. There was yet another version of this discussion. The same idea, but names were switched around. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel is the one who says they have to go to the point of saying lasois. Rav Dimi does not require. And then we're going to have those three akashas on Rav Dimi who in this version does not require. And it's going to be pretty much substantiating that it does need to be said. Omar Shmuel and Bezdin chayav anashiyam lehem mutarim atem la'asois. According to Shmuel, Bezdin is only responsible. They spelled it out. Go ahead and do it. Rav Dimi Marado Omar, however, no. Afilu mutarim atem. Nigmar even just by saying you're allowed to, it's mutter for you. That's considered a proper ruling of Amar Abaye. So we're going to have those same sources instead of supporting Rav Dimi. Now they're going to be a kasha on Rav Dimi. Amar Abaye, look in the Mishnah about the rebellious Zaken. It doesn't seem to be that what you're saying is correct. Chazal Iri Vashani came back to his town and he taught, he learned, and he taught. Elimek der Shalimed. His old ways, Potter is still not chayiv unless he actually ruled her alasis to go and do something. Then he's chayiv. So we see anything less than that is not considered. We find the same regarding the woman there. They told her to go and marry. Apparently that's considered hayra. Anything less not. Likewise in our Mishnah, we see this indication. We speak about a bezdin ruling to do lavar. And that pretty much settles this. Okay, so the point is, if a yachid relied on the bezdin, he's potter, provided the bezdin actually issued a practical ruling, mutarim atem, or according to one sheet, mutarim atem la'asois. And in fact, this version was corroborated from various sources. And the Mishnah continues. Now, why this added language? You could simply say, what's the point of adding shoygeg al piyam? Obviously, it was b'shoygeg, right? Ask the Gemara Benistan, you could simply say v'asal piyam. Okay, he implemented their ruling. He followed their example. The word shoygeg lamali, why is that mentioned in the Mishnah? Marava. Because the Mishnah is alluding to two separate cases, two variations of this story. The basic one is, they said you can eat the chaylev, and he ate it. Unbeknownst to him was a mistake. That's the first. The word shoygeg is lasuri is coming to cover another case. Hoyru bezin shechelev mutter, as follows. Bezin paskin, you can eat a certain type of fat. Now this fellow walks into the shop, and he sees a glob of something which looks like fat, but there are two different types of fat. There's chaylev, which is forbidden, and there's shuman, a different type of fat which is permitted, which is totally fine. For real, okay? And he thought this was shuman. That was his intent when he ate it. It turns out, he discovers later, actually, he got things confused. It was really chaylev. But lucky for him, that this chaylev bezdin permitted. You see, so he ate the chaylev. But why did he eat it? He didn't eat it. It's not like the other fellow who intentionally ate the chaylev, relying on the Bezdin's ruling. No, he wasn't even planning on eating the chaylev. He was planning on eating the shuman. Because of his own confusion, he ate the chaylev, which turned out to be the item that Bezdin permitted, erroneously. So they both ended up doing the same thing. The fellow who ate the chaylev outright, and the fellow who mistakenly ate the chaylev. They both ate something which was really asa, but erroneously permitted by the Bezdin. The question is if this, let's call him Shimon, this second fellow, the confused fellow, can he now be exonerated because the Bezdin bears responsibility for what he did? Or shall we say, look, it was really his mistake. I mean, theoretically, he would have eaten it, relying on the Bezdin. If he would have an interest in eating chaylev and knowing that it's chaylev. But he didn't know. He thought it was shuman. So the resulting act was really a result of his own confusion. Interesting question. So according to Rava, the Mishnah is covering this case as well. He's also covered by the Bezdin. The word shogeg, la'asui, is coming to cover this case. Hoyru Bezdin shechel of mutter. Bezdin ruled that chaylev is okay. When his fellow, thinking that he's eating shuman, ate chaylev. It got mixed up. V'achli ate the chaylev. Pater. He doesn't have to bring a carbon because this item was permitted by the Bezdin. They bear responsibility. Rashi explains, even if the reason was because even if he would have realized that it's chaylev, he would have eaten it anyway because of the Bezdin's ruling. So that's called toilev Bezdin. He's relying on the Bezdin, in theory. So they're going to bring the carbon instead of him. So that's the word shogeg, covering this type of unintentional mix-up. But the word al piyam is covering al piyam mamash. Standard case where he was toilev Bezdin. Bezdin ruled chaylev is okay, and he ate the chaylev, relying on them. So according to this version of Rava, both cases are covered. There was another version of Rava. Amar Rava, no, shogeg al piyam hu de pater. The Mishnah says shogeg al piyam. It's just the opposite. They tell you only if he was shogeg al piyam mamash, if he really relied on them, hu de pater, then he's exempt. He ate the chaylev knowing that it's chaylev, but also knowing that it was covered by the Bezdin, that was permitted by the Bezdin, then he's pot. Then who the potter? That's when he's pot. But a Shimon who got himself confused, Chayv, he has to bring a carbon, because in practice he wasn't consciously relying on the Bezdin. Says the one Milsa the Pshitila Rava. This halacha, this let's call it the confused case, which to Rava was clear. According to the first version, he's covered. According to the second version of Rava, he's not covered. So it's clear either way. This very scenario was actually in doubt. He wasn't sure how to deal with it. The boy, Rabbi Bar asked the following question. So he's going to go on to describe our confused fellow. Bezdin ruled chaylev is okay. And he mixed chaylev with shuman. He got confused. He ate the chaylev by mistake. What's his status? Amar Rava, so Rava will seek to shed clarity on this. Tashma. Look at our Mishnah, where it has that extra word shogeg, halach yachad v'asher al piyam, etc., etc., etc. Right? Shogeg al piyam. Lamali, why? The extra lashon of shogeg al piyam, lamali lav lasuye, apparently to cover this case as well. Hoyru Bezdin shechel of muta. They ruled chaylev is okay. When chal v'chel b'shuman, got mixed up between the two. V'achlin edit pater is covered by the Bezdin. So you see, it's okay. Well, no, says the Gemara, Dilma. Perhaps you could learn the Mishnah differently. Shogeg al piyam with the pater. Only if the shogeg was, in fact, in following their ruling. He ate chaylev knowing that it's chaylev, but relying on the Bezdin, then he's pater. Aval, but in the case of the confused fellow, perhaps he's chayv, he bears responsibility for that. According to the next version, Rava actually sought to prove just the opposite from the Mishnah, which actually corresponds to the second version of Rava earlier, that in fact he's chayiv tashma. What does the Mishnah say? Halach yachad v'asher shogeg al piyam. He committed this sin and error, relying on the Bezdin. completely relying on them. My level of sumit means shayig al piyam with the pot. Only if his error was actually reliant on the bezdin. So you ate the chalev thinking that it's okay. But if he merely got confused, and that's why he ate it, he's going to be chayav. Well, says the Gemara, no, perhaps you can say it differently. Dilma. Perhaps the mission is meant to be learned as though it's describing two cases. Oy shogig, oy al piyam. Either it was a shogig or fully reliant on them. So we're not really sure which way. But in fact, this was a machlokes discussed in the earlier generations of the Amoraim. Beplukta. This very topic is actually up for discussion, up for dispute between Rav, who says pater, and Rabbi Yechon, who says chayiv. Again, we have this case, Bezdin Paskin chaylev is okay, and he confused the chaylev with the shuman. And he ate the chaylev. Rav Amar pater. There's no need for a carbon. Bezdin covers it. Rabbi Yechon Amar chayiv. Rabbi Yechon says he has to bring a carbon. Meisvei comes a kasha on Rabbi Yechon. We have a halacha that if one commits an aveira, right, b'shoigig, not realizing that, but he's the type of person who, unfortunately, doesn't have very high regard for the averas in the Torah, and he would do it anyways. It so happens to be he lucked out in this case. He did it unintentionally, and he discovered his mistake. Is he eligible to bring a carbon? No. The only way you can bring a carbon is if, in fact, the person regrets his action. If the person would have been aware at the time, he wouldn't have done it. But this fellow would have done it anyways. That's called a shav. He would have retracted. He would have held back, midiyasai, due to his awareness. Only that type of person who would not have done it, had he known, then, if he did it unintentionally, he brings a carbon. As opposed to a fellow who's a non-adherent person. Basically, it's going to be a kasha. How could we say that this fellow in our story confused the two pieces of fat has to bring a carbon? Look, even if he would have been fully aware of the fact that this is chaylev, he would have proceeded anyway because Bezdin issued a ruling that upsakt that it's mutter. So how could that trigger a carbon chatas? He's lacking this very vital condition of shav midiyasa. He would not have repented. He would not have stopped. He would not have held back. Had he have known? Let's see the Bryce. So some in the community can bring a carbon. Not everybody. Not everybody who does the Avera can bring a carbon. Problem more as opposed to a fellow who doesn't really conform to the halachas of the Torah. Reb Shimon ben Yossi Emishem. Shimon in the Tzorich. You don't have to go to that pasuk. We have another pasuk. It's something that he wouldn't be doing. And then he discovers his mistake. We learn from here. Only a fellow who's in a state of mind, a state of commitment, that wouldn't do it if he would know. Hashav, if he would do it like teshuva, he wouldn't, right? He would hold back midiyasai. If he would know, if he would have that awareness. Then, if he mistakenly proceeds and does the avera and discovers his mistake, he's eligible for a carbon, maybe carbon al shigigas, the carbon upon his mistake. But a mumar, who's loishav midiyasai, he wouldn't have restrained himself had he known. So it so happens to be, it was unintentional. He lucked out and he discovered that his mistake. He doesn't bring a carbon, not eligible. Ain't maybe carbon, he will not bring a carbon to account for his mistake. End of Bryce. How does that apply to us? So the Bezdin issued a ruling. Chaylev is mutter. He walked into the butcher's store, picked up a piece of, in his mind, fat which is shuman, a mutter. Turns out it was really chaylev. He ate it thinking that it was shuman. Rabbi Yechanan obligates him to bring a carbon. He's not shav midiyasa, even if he would have been fully aware of the identity of this piece. That is chaylev. He would have eaten it anyways because the Bezdin paskin that it's okay. If this in fact is correct, halo shav midiyasahu. He's lacking that vital precondition. He's not shav midiyasai. Right? So if Rabbi Yechanan requires him a chatas, how does that fit with this requirement? Halo shav midiyasahu. Amrav Papa. Rav Yechon holds it is considered shav midiyasai. Because let's just backtrack a second. Rabbi Yechon first of all holds that he's personally culpable. You can't blame it on the Bezdin. You ate the chaylev because you got confused. So it's his personal act. His personal doing. Regarding the shav midiyasai element, there is an element of Shav Midiyasai, to the extent that if Bezdin comes to the realization, which they eventually did, that they erred in their psak, they issued an erroneous ruling, they would retract, they would cancel, they would walk back on it, right? So there's an element of potential regret here. And that's why it's called Shav Midiyasai. Because Rabbi Yechon holds kiven the chemisyadu lebeidina, since when Bezdin becomes aware of their mistake, Hadri they would cancel their ruling. And likewise he would. He would be chayzer as well. He would no longer engage in this chaylev. Shav Midiyasai Karina Bey, it qualifies as Shav Midiyasai. So again, the point is, according to Rabbi Yechon, he can't blame what he did on the Bezdin because it was his own doing. He only ate it because he got confused between the... So that's number one. And as to the requirement of Shav Midiyasai, it does qualify. Because as soon as Bezdin, by extension he, discovers that really chaylev, that they thought was mutter, is really usher, he wouldn't eat the chaylev outright. So therefore, it qualifies for karban chatas. Shav Midiyasai Karina Bey v'chayev. Amar Rava. So Rechon says he brings a carbon. Going to Rav, he does not, because he relied on the fact is, what he did was permitted by the Bezdin, it's considered covered by the Bezdin. But still, Rav, even Rav would agree, there's a din that the par helam davar is only going to happen. The carbon is only going to be brought, the public carbon, only if most, we said this before, only if most of the tzibur, most of the nation, most of the community committed this sin. So let's say it's exactly 50-50. Plus this confused fellow. Does he sort of tip the scale and turns it into a majority? The fact is, he ate the same chaylev that 50% of the community ate, so it's really 51%, right? No. He's a separate entity. The Rav Tzibur, he cannot complete, he cannot join and tip the scale to make it into a roiv. My tama, why? Amakra, the pasuk says b'shgaga. They all, follow the ruling of the Bezdin b'shgaga, unknowingly, unintentionally. In one experience of unintent. It only works, it only is true if all of them, meaning the roiv of the tzibur, erred for the same reason. Now in this case, where 50% erred outright, eating the chaylev, thinking the chaylev is mutter, and he erred because he's confused between chaylev and shuman. A little bit of different circumstance. So you can't really be mitzaref, you can't join them, and you don't have a majority. Okay, so just recap. Standard cases, there was a hirah by Bezdin, chaylev was mutter, and the fellow ate it, relying on them. Of course, he's covered by the Bezdin. What of thinking that it's shuman? He ate the chaylev. He would have eaten it anyways. The fact is, this time he ate it because he thought it was shuman. According to Rav, it's covered as well. According to Rabbi Yechon, has to bring his own karban chatas. Rabbi Yochanan had this as a question. Rava had it clear, but we're not sure. We have two versions, whether he's covered or not. Okay, so now we have two parts to the Mishnah. The first part, you relied on the Bezdin, and the Mishnah, sort of depicts three scenarios. Either they actually carried out their ruling in practice, they ate the chaylev and he ate with them, the same setting, or he ate after them, or only he ate and not them. What's the point of presenting all three scenarios? So Mishnah Reish, I understand that in the first part of the Mishnah we just discussed, where he's following the Bezdin and covered by the Bezdin, It makes sense. Loizu afsukatam. It's a build-up. Not only is he covered by the Bezdin in a case where he did it with them together as one, even if he followed them, right? He did it following the Bezdin. Or even the third case where they didn't actually eat the chel, just he ate it. Even there, he's covered because the fact is, it was facilitated by their ruling. So that's understood. Allah Seifa. What about the second part of the Mishnah, where he actually discovered their mistake? He was a dayan, he realized their in grave error. He's not covered by the Bezdin. He can't blame what he did on the Bezdin. And the Mishnah again depicts all three scenarios. So he's chayev, his own personal carbon, whether he joined them all together in the act, or whether they did it now and he did it later, or even if they didn't do it at all, just he did it. Well, obviously, if just he did it, there's even more reason for him to be chayev. So you're pretty much progressively getting more and more. Getting more and more he's getting more and more responsible. So what's the point of mentioning it? But in the second part of Mishnah, where you're highlighting his personal culpability, if anything, you should present the cases in the reverse. Not only if he did it himself, without them at all. Even if they did it, but he followed it at a later date. And even if they all did it together in the same setting. That's the way it should be sequenced, to sort of highlight the point. Mishnah doesn't sequence it that way. Rather, it's the other way. Not only if he did it in the same setting as them, is he chayiv, even if they did it today, he followed later on. And even if they didn't do it at all, and just he, well, obviously, that's more reason for him to be chayiv. What's the point of, you're right, zu, vein tzarach lema zukatani. Sometimes the Mishnah staggers it this way as well. So he's chayiv, even if he did it with them together at the same time. And certainly, if he did it at a later date, and certainly if only he did it not them. Perhaps it's just sort of to match the sequence in the first part of the Mishnah. In any case, we have an individual, one of the dayanim realized their mistake, or he's a sort of a student. He hadn't yet received his smicha, but he's quite capable. He's a man of authority. He can paskin shailas. He's roy loy roy. He has the know-how, but he's not really a formal judge. Tarti lamali. Why does the Mishnah, in fact, have to present two different variations? A dayan, a talmud. Amar of Isrich. There is a point. Saga the perhaps I would say that unless you have the highest level of scholarship, then you can still rely on the Bezdin. Perhaps I would think, when do we say that he's his own man and carries his own responsibility? Only if he has the breadth of knowledge. Gomer is like Gemara, he learned it all. V'saver, lashon of svara, he has depth, he has analytical abilities. So he's accomplished in both breadth and depth. Aval Gomer v'leisaver loy, but perhaps he just has the Gomer, the know-how, but not the depth. He's not known to be, saver. Perhaps in this case, he wouldn't hold the responsibility, he wouldn't be culpable for what he did. He could rely on the best. That's the point of the Mishnah. Not only if he's an accomplished dayan, even if he's just a talmud v'roi lo'ira, which represents, the lower tier scholar. Amali Abaye. Talmud v'roi lo'ira sounds to me like the pinnacle. He's roi to paskin. Amali Abaye lo'ira gomer v'saver mashma sounds like he has gomer and saver. Amali. So Rabbi says you're right. I meant to say the same thing but a little different. I meant to say like this. Imi had the Mishnah only mentioned the first example of the dayan, I would think, it's only because he's gomer v'saver. Because one of the members of the Sanhedrin certainly has that, qualification. Aval gomer v'saver, but if it's just gomer without saver, perhaps he's not. Chayiv. Tana roy lo ra. That's why the Mishnah adds the second example, roy lo ra, which also denotes gomer v'saver. But it's an extra Mishnah to highlight, even if he doesn't have both qualifications. Mishnah, you say from the extra Mishnah, we learn afilu gomer v'lo saver, even if it's just gomer without saver, or saver without the gomer, v'lo gomer is also chayiv. Roy lo ra. So we have the Talmud, who's roy lo ra. Isn't that sort of an oxymoron? If he's roy loy ro, why is he called a Talmud? Can we have an example of this type of person? Amarava, yeah, we have two examples. Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zayma. We're all familiar with Ben Azai, Ben Zayma. Here we have a Gemara. They had a first name, Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zayma. So although they were scholars of the highest level, but they were called Talmidim because they were sitting in front of the Chacham, they never got smicha. And that's what the Mishnah is referring to. Amali Abaye, Gavna Mezidu, such great men. If he goes and implements this ruling, knowing that it's a mistake, that's not a shoygeg. Mishnah says, okay, he can't blame it on the Bezdin, but he's chayiv. Chayiv what? Chayiv a carbon? Carbon is only for a shoygeg. He had full awareness. He knew that he was doing an aver if he was such a great scholar. Says Tameich. Responds Rav Tabai, according to your kasha, that a scholar of such high magnitude could not be considered a shoygeg. So what about the Brisa of the Sanyu? Brisa says, fellow sins by soisa achas. So he did a chet by soisa achas, by doing an error, doing a sin by shoygeg. We learn from here only a yachid, an individual, ha'isam pi'atzmai, who erred, who sinned due to his own mistake. Chayiv, then he brings a card, but by Raz Bezdin Potter. The reason was because the Bezdin ruled, and he's Potter. Kates and the Brisa presents an example of such. The Bezdin ruled that chelev is okay to eat. And one of the Dayanim realized Shem Tov, they made a mistake. Oy Talmud Yeshalif name, or a Talmud sitting before them, who has the highest qualifications. Kigain, here we go. The Brisa names him by name, Shimon ben Azai. And he still went ahead and ate the chelev. Perhaps he's covered by the Bezdin. No, Tamalim Vasesa Achas. If he went ahead and did it independent of the Bezdin, he's chayiv. So even though the Bezdin ruled, but he knew better. He's going to be chayiv. He's not covered by the Bezdin. Yachid ha'isal pi atzmi chayiv. The Yachid followed his own judgment. He's chayiv. Whereas Bezdin Potter, only a fellow who in fact followed the Bezdin blindly, then he's Potter. As opposed to Shimon ben Azai, he knew better. He should have known better. So this supports Habaye's point that even a great man like Shimon ben Azai, he is chayiv. But what is he chayiv? He's not considered an intentional sinner. Chas v'shalom. He's not amazing. Yeah, he has to bring a carbon. So back to the question: why? If he's so knowledgeable and aware, shouldn't that be considered amazing? Aleichem eshkachasla. So more continues. So in fact, how does this work? Where's the shaygig element? Can go into the other das. Certainly he realized that the chelev is forbidden, but he made a mistake with respect to his obligation to comply, to conform with the ruling of the Bezdin. He thought that even though he knows that it's asav v'katah, he made a mistake with respect to the obligation to follow the rulings of our leaders. But mitzvah l'shmai divrei chacham, the mitzvah to adhere to the words of the chacham. And he thought that even if they are ruling to permit an isser, which he knows is a mistake, he's meant to follow. So you can't blame it on the Bezdin because you knew that it's a mistake, but it's still considered a shaygeg because you made a judgment error with respect to the extent of mitzvah l'shmai divrei chachamim. Says the Gemara, the dinami. So likewise, says Rava regarding my interpretation. The individual in our Mishnah is a great man like Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zayma. As to your question, well, isn't it amazing? No. They made a mistake with respect to the Torah, the mitzvah, the Shema, the Chacham. They thought that even then they're meant to follow the words of the Chachamim, despite them realizing and knowing that it's an error. And the Mishnah continues. Okay, so what's the bottom line? Zeh klal. And typically when the Mishnah, sort of recaps it with a zeh klal, it's coming to add something. So what's the rule? If one followed his own track, he's chayev. As opposed to Toile Bezdin, if he was, blindly following the Bezdin, then he's potter. So what, additional aspect that we are trying to cover? What cases are we trying to cover with this sort of recap in the Mishnah? Lasui might to cover what? Lasui mevayit ba'ira. Another example of a Toile ba'atzmai is a mevayit. Literally means he kicks. Ba'ira. He rejects. He's known to turn his back on the rulings of the Chacham. He's not a conformist. Not at all. From the old days. Right? And here the Bezdin ruled that the Chaylev is mutter. He says, okay, you know what? This time I'm going to listen to that. But deep down, he's not really relying on them because he never relies on the Bezdin. It's considered a personal mistake and he has to bring a carbon. Now when the Mishnah says, this is in contrast to Toile Bezdin, a fellow who in fact relied on the Bezdin is potter, what's that coming to cover? What additional, variation of that type of case? L'suya to include Hoyru Bezdin, v'yadu sheto. Bezdin ruled that the Chaylev is okay to eat, and they discovered their mistake. V'chazru behen, and they retracted. But in the meantime, an individual not knowing that they retracted went and ate it. He's still going to be potter. The fact is, in his mind, he was relying on the Bezdin. So that's what the Mishnah is coming to add. Well, that's already been discussed later on, Daf Gimel. We discussed this case specifically. Habehedik Tana, it's a Mishnah. So why do we have to allude to it in our Mishnah as well? Well, that's the derech of the Mishnah is Tane. First we sort of present it in short, about the Mefarish, and then we go and elaborate and explain in more detail. Okay, so the Mishnah. Our Mishnah teaches that if the Bezdin made a hira, they ruled and issued a ruling, and a yachid, individual, followed and implemented his potter. Now let's realize that the halacha of par helam davar shel tzibur, the special carbon, only comes when most of the tzibur followed. So in that case, you can certainly understand. Look, they're covered by the carbon; they don't have to bring personal carbonis. But in our Mishnah, we're speaking about a yachid, an individual, or at least below 50% or less of the tzibur. Doesn't qualify for a par helam davar shel tzibur. And the Mishnah still says the sinner does not have to bring a personal carbon. So even though nobody's really addressing what he did, there's going to be no carbon brought on that act. He's still going to be potter because of the fact that he's covered by the Bezdin. Amru Dam Shmuel, you should know. It's not a simple halacha. Zoi div Rabbi, this is Rabbi's shita. Then in fact, if a yachid followed the Bezdin, he's potter. Aval Chacham disagree. They hold yachid she'asa, but as Bezdin's chayiv. If it's only a yachid, despite the fact that he followed the Bezdin, he has to bring a personal carbon, because the fact is there's no carbon addressing what he did. Now, where do we find that there's a Rabbi Yehuda that holds that way, and there's a Rabbanan that disagree? We have to go look for it. My Rabbi Yehuda, where is the Rabbi Yehuda that you're talking about? The Sanya. We have a brisa which discusses that's the psukim where a yachid, individual, brings his own personal carbon chatas upon sinning. This is unrelated to the Bezdin situation. Now we have the word bas soisa. We have three exclusions, three miyutim. Nefesh sounds like yachid, only this nefesh, only if it's one person. The word achas also coming to minimize one, bas soisa, only if it was done in this manner. So we're going to learn different halachas from these three miyutim, two of which we're not going to really discuss, only the third case. The miyut that's derived from the third of the exclusions, Hara'elu Shloshim miyutim, we have a total of three miyutim. And regarding the third miyut, which is ba'asoisa, we learn ha'isam pi'atzmei chayiv, only an individual who followed his own intuition, who erred based on his own misjudgment. He brings his own personal chatas. However, Boiraz, Bezdin Potter, if he followed the Bezdin, he's Potter. Clearly, even an individual, less than the majority, less than the Kohal, there's no Par Helam Davar. Still, since he followed the ruling of the Bezdin, he's Potter. That's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. And that's reflected in our Mishnah as well. as opposed to the Chachamim. The Rabbanan disagree. And where do we find the opinion of the Chachamim stated? My Rabbanan. The Sani, we have another Bryce. Adayni Yomer. We'll still say, miut kol shachatu, if a minority of the kol sinned, chayavin. In this case, each individual has to bring his own personal karma to address that sin. You know why? Because nobody else will. Shein bezin mevin alidein par. In this case, where it's only a miut, the bezin will not be bringing that par to cover them. So in this case, I would think that they have to bring personal karbanis. But, so right away you see that this is in disagreement with Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Unless the Bezdin brings the par, right? So in this case, since they're not bringing the par, they have to bring their own karbanis. However, Roiv kol shachatuf, in fact, it's the majority that sinned due to the hayra of the Bezdin, Yub Turin. In fact, in this case, we shall say that they're pater from bringing personal karbanis, Shari Bezdin, Levin, Alidain par, because the Bezdin will in fact bring the par. That's what I would think. Talmud Leimer, no. Comes the pasuk and says, Meyam Haaretz. And this goes back to the personal carbon chatas that an individual brings when he sins. Meyam Haaretz, one of the members of the Afilu Ruba, Afilu Kul, even if most or the entire nation sinned, each person will bring a personal carbon. Now, what happened? Was Bezdin involved? So why do they have to bring personal carbonis? We already have the par. Was Bezdin not involved? What's going on? B'mai, what case is the Brisa discussing? Ilema b'shigigas masa. Bezdin shaloi b'ira. We're speaking that there was a mistaken act, so to speak. There was a sin done b'shgaga without the Bezdin's ruling involved. There was no ruling at all. It was just, an outright mistake. So they thought it was permitted and they ate it. So why are we involving the Bezdin? Bezdin Mavidatai, why are we even discussing the Bezdin in this context? Right? Bezdin's bringing a par, they're not bringing a par, they're not involved. Shalei Baraz Bezdin, if in fact they committed this act without being triggered by the ruling of the Bezdin, Bezdin mi maisu? Shalei Baira, since when does the Bezdin bring a par if they weren't involved and did not issue any rulings? Ella, apparently it must be Bahira, that in fact it was merely a realization and implementation of an errant ruling by the Bezdin. Right? And the Brisa teaches that if it was only a miut, a minority of the kohol, they'll have to bring personal karbanas. Because in this case there's no par on their behalf. And the Brisa is adding that even if the Rav sinned due to the hayra of the Bezdin, they have to bring a carbon. Personal karbanis, in addition to the par that Bezdin brings. Ask the Gemara why. If Bezdin issued a ruling which triggered this activity, so you're bringing from the word Me'am Aretz that they'll have to bring a personal carbon. Well, that pasuk Me'am Aretz is speaking about a different context. B'shigas ma'asu d'chsiv. That's where an individual sinned without Bezdin's involvement. But in this case, if Bezdin is involved and it's most of the tzibur, there's a par being brought. Why would you say that they have to bring their own personal karbanis? So rather, the price has to be interpreted a bit differently. As follows. So basically, the objective will be to prove, to see from this price that in fact the Chachamim hold that sure, when there's no Bezdin involved, all agree that the individuals have to bring personal karbanis, whether they're, a miut or even a rabbin. That's going to be the objective of the Brisa. Even a rabbin, even Roiv, if there was no Bezdin involvement, then they're personally culpable. They have to bring personal karbanis. What happened when Bezdin wasn't involved? They issued the hayra, which triggered this domino effect. So, if it was only a miut who implemented, they'll be chayiv personal karbanis. Right? And this svara would be because there's nobody addressing what they did. There's no par being brought if it's only a miut. as opposed to if the Bezdin made Hayra and the Roiv of the Tzibur followed through. And there's no culpability on their part. Rather, there's a parhelam davar shel Tzibur who covers it. So we're going to discuss pretty much 4 scenarios. If a miut sinned due to their own misjudgment, or due to the Bezdin's Hayra, and both we're going to say they're chayiv personal karbanos. And then we have the Roiv who committed this sin on their own, without the Bezdin. Or if they were merely following the ruling of the Bezdin. So let's see. El Lavach come around the Bryce is presenting as follows. Starting point is miut kol shechata b'shigas mas. You have a miut who did the chet. Simple confusion, misjudgment, without any hayra'ah involved. No Bezdin involved. Clearly, chayav, they'll have to bring personal karbanos. Shein Bezdin mevin alidein par b'hayra'ah. Because even when there is a hayra'ah, even when it was triggered by a ruling of a Bezdin, since they're not a roiv, there's no par, hohen chayav, so we assume they're chayav to bring personal karbanos. As we said before, Shitas Chachamim is that a miyut is always personally responsible. Okay, so that's sort of a given. Whether Bezdin is involved or not involved, if it's just a miyut, personal responsibility. Yochel, what about Roiv Tzibur? She'asu b'shigas mas. If it's most of the tzibur, who simply committed a sin unintentionally without hayra'ah of Bezdin, perhaps they do not have to bring personal karbanos, because we find that in some cases the tzibur is different than the yachid, i.e., when Bezdin is involved. So perhaps Yub Turin. In all cases, there should be part of personal karbanos. Sharei Bezdin mevin alein par b'hayra'ah, because if Bezdin is involved, they bring the par, not the tzibur. So perhaps they're exempted. If Roiv tzibur committed a sin, whether with Bezdin's involvement or even without, there's no personal culpability. Talmud-bavli, that's why we go to that pasuk ma'aretz to tell you, afilu ruba. Lacking Bezdin's involvement triggers personal culpability, even if the sin was committed by the majority. They have to bring personal karbanos. So there you go. Shitas Chachamim is that the only time the crowd is patur is if 2 conditions are met. A, it was due to Bezdin's ruling, and B, it was the Roiv. But if it's Bezdin ruling and only a minority committing, or no Bezdin ruling and minority committed, or even majority committed the sin, there will be chayiv karbana is chatos on a personal level. Okay, so again, the starting point was if it's a miut who did a chatoim without the Bezdin's involvement, they're certainly personally chayiv, because the assumption is that even when the Bezdin is involved, they're chayiv. It's just a miut, as opposed to the tzibur, who perhaps are pater, even without Bezdin's involvement, because when Bezdin is involved, they're pater. Comes a new pasuk and says that they're chayiv in a case where Bezdin was not involved. Amar Papa will challenge this interpretation of the Bryce, which sort of brought us to that, conclusion. Provided a source for Shitas Chachamim that the miut who committed a sin are chayiv personal karbanos, even when there is a hirah from Bezdin. Amar Papa Minai, who's to say? Where do you see this in the Bryce? Dilma, perhaps the Bryce means a bit differently. Lo yehin v'lo Bezdin. That if it's a miut who did the chet, so yeah, if there was no Bezdin, they're chayiv. However, if there is a Bezdin, all the Bryce said was that Bezdin will not bring a par. Yeah, maybe Bezdin doesn't bring, and they don't either bring. if in fact they relied on the bezdin. Lo hin v'lo bezdin. Nor they nor the bezdin. Well, that can't be what the Brisa is aiming for. That's the opinion of the Brisa. That if it's a miyut, they're chayiv, if there's a miyut, and bezdin was involved, even though there's no par, they're still going to be pater. If that's in fact the case. So, when we have that pasuk mema uretz, to add liability, instead of applying it to the roiv tzibur without the bezdin has to bring a carbon because of mema uretz. Apparently, the understanding is that there's no need to even discuss miyud tzibur without the bezdin. Of course they're chayiv. Right? Because, you can't go for the gold when you haven't yet established the silver. Why are we assuming, so to speak? It sounds like we're assuming that a miyut who did a chet without the bezdin is certainly chayiv on a personal level. And that frees up the pasuk, so to speak, to apply to a roiv tzibur without bezdin. That'll be chayiv. But you haven't yet proven that a miyut tzibur is chayiv if there was no bezdin. My area de kamahad al rub l'chiyuva. Who's to say? Well, why in fact does the Bryce apply the pasuk ma'aret, extra pasuk on the roiv of the tzibur to obligate the makarbon? There was no bezdin involved, which sounds like it's a given. It's understood that a miyut tzibur without a bezdin is chayiv. Who's to say? How do we know that? Lav mechlal. It sounds like the miyut b'hira kaim le'edum achavi b'hira. Isn't it because the Brisa took it as a fact, as a given, as understood, that if it's a miyut tzibur that committed, even if there was hayra's bezdin, they'll still bring personal karbanis. And therefore, it's pretty obvious that if there was no hayra, of course they bring personal karbanis. So those two aspects are givens, are established facts. Again, that if it's a miyut tzibur, whether or not there was hayra involved, they bring personal karbanis. So now that frees up the pasuk to be applied for a roiv tzibur, to teach that if a roiv tzibur committed a sin on their own, independent of the bezdin, they'll bring a karban chatas. Again, that highlights this established fact that the Brisa sort of took for granted, that a miyut tzibur always brings karbanis, personal karbanis chatas. And that frees up the pasuk for the roiv. Because otherwise, if it's ambiguous and unknown, first we should seek to establish. First we should go ahead and seek to establish and clarify the status of a miyut, al miyuta, and substantiate that in fact if it's a miyut, the mechay b'shigas masa, that are chayiv, if in fact they committed personal sins, without the bezdin. And then if we have any leftover psukim, we should go ahead and try to figure out what happens al ruba regarding the majority, whether or not we can obligate them b'shigas mas if they committed a personal sin without the bezdin. Again, if this halacha is as yet unclear, which halacha? That we call it a yachid, right? A miyut, less than the majority, who committed through the bezdin, who sinned because of the bezdin. We're not sure if there's room to think that they're pater, right? That's the point of our discussion, right? What happens to a miyut that followed the bezdin? If there's room to think that they're pater, then who's to say anything regarding their obligation if there was no bezdin? We're not clear on this whole thing yet. So first we have to seek to clarify whether they're chayiv, if there's no bezdin, and then we can go to the majority, which is sort of the next step. That's a bigger chiddush, because typically the majority gets covered by the par, right? So first we have to deal with basics, and then go to the, more advanced. The fact that the Brisa sort of disregarded the need to do that. It's just assumed that if it's a miyut, and they committed their own sin, independent of any bezdin's rulings, they're certainly chayiv. The assumption is they're chayiv. Why? Let's assume, why? Because A miyut is always chayiv personal korbanos, even when Bezin is involved. So that's a given. That's an established fact. Elalav, so apparently, midloi mahadal miyut mechayivin. The Meshigas Mas. The fact that the Brisa is not really troubled. It's not seeking to clarify, to establish the status of a miyut, and to prove that they're in fact chayiv when they did their own personal avera. It's a given. It's a known fact. Why? Because the miyut always brings their own carbon, even when Bezin is involved. So that's a given. Ubasayif. Right? He didn't do that. He didn't try to clarify their status and only then go to the next level, Ubasayif, and ultimately Mahada, and go look for the status of Al-Ruba on the majority, whether or not to obligate them when they committed personal sins. The Brisa doesn't do that. Shemamina, what does that tell us about the position of the Brisa? That in fact, a miyut is always going to bring a personal karma. Miyut, b'hara, even when there was a bezin that triggered it. Chayavin, hen kispa, usira, they have to bring personal karbanas. A she-goat, a she-sheep. So once that's a given, and therefore, it's obvious. Certainly, when there was no hayra involved, and they committed their own personal sin, of course they bring karbanis. So it proves our point. That there's a dissenting view, Shitas Chachamim, featured in this Brisa, that if there was hayra, so yeah, if most of the tzibur followed, they're pater. But if a miyut followed, there's nobody addressing his sin, there's no carbon being brought, he has to bring a personal carbon. So this was sort of triggered by the fact that we have in the parent country that we have two brises, right? We have the first brise, im nefesh achas techta ba'asoisa, which told us that even a yachid who followed the bezin is pater, and we have the next brise, just discussed, which presents otherwise. Now, how do we know the names to the faces? How do we know the first brise is Rabbi Yehuda, and second is the Rabbana? They're both unnamed brises. Michti, look, Tarvayus Tamin Tanan, both brises are unnamed. How do we know? How do you know to say it? The first one's Rabbi Yehuda, or Basrais Rabban, the second one's Rabban? Perhaps it's vice versa. Says the Gemara, because the style conforms with Rabbi Yehuda. Man shamas like the Dorish mi'ute ki agavna. Who's the Shita that typically presents these types of drashes? Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, Pasuk says Zois Torah Sa'oila. So Zois is exclusionary, right? Limited, just this. Torah Sa'oila, right? Rashi says Zois he. Ha'oila, Zois is a miyut. He is a miyut. Ha'oila. Right? It's coming to exclude different cases, different halachis. Zois Torah Sa'oila he. Ha'oila Shleshim Utin teaches us 3 miyutim. So we see that's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Likewise in the first brisa, which sort of runs on the similar track, making miyutim from the word nefesh and achas ba'asoisa, similar type of interpretation, would read Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Another way to know, Adayni Aymer, because that brisa, which begins with the words of Adayni Aymer, loy matzis mukusla, Rabbi Yehuda can't be like Rabbi Yehuda. The second brisa is not Rabbi Yehuda. Why? The Ketani, because the brisa says Reva kol sha'asu shachata. Most of the tzibur committed. Who brings the carbon? Bezdin Mavian Alein Par. The Bezdin brings the par. So they sort of cover everybody. That's not Rabbi Yehuda's shita, because he holds, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, Ha'amar, he holds tzibur the maisi. The crowd brings the par, not the Bezdin. The Bezdin loy. It's not as we see later in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda, Shiva Shvatim, Shechatam Mavian Shiva Parim, if 7 tribes committed the sin, so they all bring the par. Each one brings a par, 7 in total, but not the Bezdin. So clearly, that second brisa is not going to be Rabbi Yehuda, rather it's the first one, as we had said. Okay, let's briefly recap today's daf. The underlying concept is, if there was a Hayra Bezdin Laver, Bezdin Shal Shivim Be'echa, the Grand Bezdin Yerushalayim, erred in their ruling, in the sense that they were mater severe isurim, and the people followed suit. So, if it's the Raiv, most of the community, certainly they're exempt, they're covered by the Par Helam Davashal Tzibur. There's no personal obligation, no personal culpability. But if it's just a yachid, or up until the majority, and now Mishnah we learn, he's pater as well. In the Gemara we discover an opposing shita, that if it's a yachid, he has to look after it himself, because there's nobody else looking after it for him. He has to bring a kispo seira. Now, we did learn in the Gemara, that the Bezdin is only considered responsible if they were hayra la'asois, if they were meira to actually do, according to Shmuel, mutarim atem, according to Rabbi Diman Arda, until they say mutarim atem la'asois. Now, what if A fellow actually ate the chaylev thinking it's mutter because of the bezdin. He's covered. What if, in scenario 2, it was due to personal confusion? He thought it was shuman, and by mistake it was chaylev, which he would have eaten anyways. There was 2 versions. There was a shayla from Rabbi Bar Chama. Ultimately, we discovered it's a machlokes. Rabbi Yechon. Rabbi says pater, Yechon says chayev, because that's not considered blaming it on the. You can't, it's not covered by the bezdin. We explained the different why the Mishnah presents various variations of these halachas. Now, in part B, the dayan or the qualified talmud dissented, knew that they were mistaken, and he followed anyways, thinking that it's a mitzvah lishma divrei chacham. In this case, he's not covered by the bezdin; rather, has to bring his own personal karban, because it's considered his own personal avera. And again, in the Mishnah, we learned that even a yachid is covered by the bezdin. That's shitas Rabbi Yehuda, whereas the chacham disagree, as we see in that long brayso. All the best to you, and hatzlacha.